and welcome to Retroscoping, the podcast tracing the evolution of feature animation. We're currently journeying through the films of Walt Disney Animation Studios, from their very first with Snow White, all the way through to the modern day. I'm your host, Nathan.
And I'm Alexa.
And Alexa, why are we qualified to do this podcast?
Well, we have both earned our badge of being Los Angelinos for at least 10 years.
Oh, yeah, that must mean we're successful Hollywood people.
And the only thing people talk about in Los Angeles is movies. So we have 10 years of experience, really like 25 years combined, because you just hit 15 of being in Los Angeles proper. And so this is what we do all day.
So today we are discussing 1942's Bambi, one of the original set of 5 Disney classics before the circumstances of World War II forced them into a collection of short compilation films and other somewhat less ambitious material.
I like that you have to point that out every single time we have a podcast.
I'm just dreading it, okay?
Nathan is not excited about Saludos Amigos, or The Three Caballeros, or Fun and Fancy Free, or Melody Time, or all of the things you've never actually watched.
There's a lot of them. That was a lot of them you just named.
Those are the ones off the top of my head. There are more.
All right. Well, listeners, you can look forward to that next. But for now, Bambi.
For now, Bambi.
So it took 7 years to develop and produce Bambi.
Mm-hmm.
It was released in 1942. And how was it received?
It didn't go over so great. Critics were not impressed, and hunters of the day were really mad about it. And honestly, to this day, hunters do not like the movie Bambi because it casts them in a very poor light.
It's hard to argue with that fact, yes. I do think it's funny that it's a movie where hunters loom around the edge, disturbing the otherwise peaceful forest life, while an owl flits about, commenting on things and talking to people. And I couldn't help thinking, yeah, that owl is totally eating this chipmunk off screen.
True facts. I mean, hey, listen, if you want to scrape together $858,000 and produce your own Hunters animated movie, go for it. Anyway, that was the budget for Bambi. $858,000. It didn't do so hot in 1942, unfortunately, but they re-released it in 1947, just after the war, and that actually is what most articles online will attribute to turning the tide of the opinion, and now counts it as a masterpiece.
I agree. It is a masterpiece.
Actually, the American Film Institute considers it the 3rd greatest American animated film. Snow White, of course, is number 1, and Pinocchio is number 2.
All right. That seems like a very set-in-time series of winners there, but okay.
Yeah. Actually, Lion King is number 4, which I agree with.
Yeah, fine.
We'll get to that.
Fight about that.
We'll get to that in many, many episodes from now.
Many episodes.
I love The Lion King. Oh, we're going to talk about The Lion King later. BT dubs.
It's hard to watch this movie in the present day and not think about The Lion King.
The entire time we watched Bambi, I was just like, oh, this reminds me of The Lion King. Oh, this reminds me of The Lion King. Oh my gosh, this is just 1942's Lion King. We'll get to that. In the meantime, Bambi, which is what we're talking about, was nominated for 3 Academy Awards. It did not win. I feel like everyone leaves that out when talking about nominations.
Well, basically, if someone says it was nominated for an Academy Award, it didn't win. They'd use the word win.
I know, but it's like one of those things where everyone's like, we're the number 1 movie in America. It's like, well, this week. Anyway, it did get nominated for Best Sound, Best Song, which Love is a Song is the one that they were nominated for, and Best Original Music Score, which these are categories that a lot of the previous movies have also been nominated for.
Right. Music tends to be the category that animation thrives in, because they're not getting any acting awards. They're not considered real enough to get Best Picture awards, and who would you even call the director?
Yeah. They don't really have a director credit at this point. They just have supervising animators.
Mm-hmm. So, the film is based on a novel by the Austrian writer Felix Salten called Bambi, A Life in the Woods, which I think is actually a really good subtitle to prepare you for what you're getting here, because it is very much just, here's life in the woods. Enjoy it for an hour. It's a not unreasonable adaptation of the book, from what I'm aware of. I think the primary difference is that the novel is a bit more... Well, it's a bit less Disney-fied about the realities of life as an animal in the forest, with more concessions to the actual mating habits of deer and the actual eating habits of other animals in the forest.
So in this one, the owl doesn't eat the chipmunk off-screen. On-screen.
Yeah. And there's an almost sort of pseudo-religious element in the book where the hunter is very much a character and presence who is thought of as a kind of false god, who is deemed by the animals all-powerful and unstoppable. And there's even an animal who is converted and taken in by the hunter and then re-released into the forest, where he's like, no, humans are good, until the hunter mercilessly kills him. And then at the end...
What animal was this?
A deer that is not in the movie.
Okay.
And then at the end, they come across the hunter's dead body, and it is an occasion for the great prince to say, see, the hunter is not all-powerful. There is another, even greater force which is watching over all of us, man and animal alike. Which I thought was interesting just because I do feel like the movie has an almost sort of religious, spiritual reverence to it. The way that the Great Prince is often depicted, the quality of the light, the hushed tones of nature in certain moments. There is something, I think, very, very, very reverential and spiritual about the film.
But it's reverence for nature.
Right.
Like, I watch this film and I go, this is what 1950s Boy Scouts wanted me to believe mountains and woods are. They are not that, by the way.
Listeners, Alexa hates camping.
I dislike camping because I dislike bugs. I dislike dirt.
Well, nature is basically just dirt.
I dislike sleeping on the ground. I dislike waking up with dew on you and me. I dislike being cold. I don't get it.
Well, at least if Bambi is to be believed, nature is beautiful.
Nature in my TV box is beautiful. Nature that has been handcrafted by animators in the 1940s is beautiful. I guess they technically were crafting in the 1930s, but they released it in the 40s.
So yeah, talk to me a little bit about what are your overall impressions of this film?
It's absolutely gorgeous, but kind of as I was watching it, I realized this film feels more like a relic to me than did Snow White or Pinocchio before it. Those ones feel really timeless, and this one feels very stuck in time. Something about the style and very much the music just sticks itself in time in a granny era for me.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
I had almost the exact opposite feeling about it. It's true, I think, that Pinocchio, and to a lesser extent Snow White, feel very traditionally structured to me. You could gussy those up with some more contemporary references and a bit more like razzle-dazzle technology, and I think you could roughly sell that kind of story today. But Bambi feels so much less like a typical movie and more like a piece of poetry that it feels out of time to me. It doesn't feel contemporary, but it doesn't feel like, the 40s to me either.
Yep, agree to disagree. On the other hand, though, I thought going into this movie that I would be bored because there isn't a whole lot to it that I remember. Some of the more artistic films can be a little slow, and so that's what I was anticipating, but I was so in love with this film. It was incredibly endearing. There are so many beautiful, sweet moments just looking at super cute animals. Everything from getting to watch a mouse pick a dewdrop off of a blade of grass and wash his face to, little quail babies following their mom through puddles, and it's just so cute. I couldn't stand it.
I think really this film is the best case scenario for combining adorable Disney and high art Disney. I think when we were watching it, we were both jotting down notes, and we said afterwards that my notes were basically like, this is so beautiful, this is so beautiful, this is so beautiful. And Alexa's notes were, this is so cute.
It's so cute, it's so cute, it's so cute. Everyone is so cute.
And it is both of those things somehow. I think
the first 40 minutes are just, let's watch Bambi be cute.
Yeah, well, it's a long series of Bambi pratfalls, which are just so expertly observed.
But he can't stand on his little toothpick legs.
And, you can they're incredibly cute, and you can sit there. You can also think, what a feat of animation they are.
Yes. Yeah. No, totally. I agree. They are doing fantastic and wonderful things. And they had to learn a lot in order to make that big jump to be able to animate these animals as if they really are animals in the forest. I know that Disney went so far as to hire a photographer to go out into nature, like deep into nature, and bring back over 500 photographs of animals doing what they do in the forest. And like, remember, this is, the 1930s photography. And Disney also brought in animals to the studio so that the animators could actually watch how they move up close and personal.
And you can tell. Although Bambi is, I think, the most expert example of that. And it maybe by the time you reach Friend Owl, it's a bit, I don't know why he just has bare feet, but he does. But yeah, I went into Bambi having not watched the whole thing in a very, very long time. The April shower sequence was actually one we watched in animation history. And it remains just a really, 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 really lovely sequence. And I was very surprised how much I loved it. I was enchanted. I think it has a way of creating a mood and a feeling that is unique among these early Disney films, and just really, I think, captures a lot of what I feel when I go out into nature, what I'm looking for when I go on a long hike, that feeling that the world is just rich with wonder. Part of that is that as a film, I think it has a really unique look and style. And I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent here because I think it's worth doing.
Tell me more.
A lot of that look and style and feel comes from the work of an artist named Tyrus Wong, who was, previous to this film, an in-betweener at Disney, which was not a job he enjoyed.
I don't know that a lot of people enjoy in-betweening. Usually the goal is to get out of in-betweening.
Yeah, he came from a background of being a landscape painter, and so when Disney started putting this film into production, Walt apparently was having a lot of trouble with the kind of background work that they'd used on things like Snow White and Pinocchio, because when you are rendering in exquisite detail every single leaf in a forest, it's very easy to lose track of the actual focus of the scene, the animals, the action. And Tyrus Wong apparently heard wind of this dilemma and came to Walt and said, look, I'm a landscape painter. That's what I do. I have some ideas, and did a lot of inspirational painting work. And Walt loved the kind of loose and impressionistic feel, the way the colors interacted, based apparently on some of the work of the Song dynasty and the painters working in that period in China. And it absolutely became the source material, the inspiration for how the film looked and felt. And I really would highly encourage people to go and learn more about Tyrus Wong's story. There was a documentary that came out a few years ago, and he was an immigrant from China during a period known as the Chinese Exclusion Act, where Chinese people were literally barred from entering the U.S. in any capacity whatsoever, except that those Chinese Americans who had already become citizens were allowed to bring in their close relatives. So there's a long tradition during that period of what they called paper children, which you would fake paperwork saying that you were the child of an existing Chinese American citizen, and you would come over, typically through Angel Island in San Francisco, and they would interrogate you and try to determine whether in fact you were from the same place, were in fact the child of this person you claimed to be the child of, whether you shared a life and a history together. And Tyrus Wong came over as one of these paper children with his father, and spent a month in the detention center on Angel Island, but he made it through. He was an incredibly talented artist, moved eventually down to Los Angeles, got involved in the studio system, and I mean, I don't think this film is what it is without his work, which is really incredible, really so beautiful that it forces Walt to change how they approach this film, the way it looks, the way it feels, and all for the better, I think. So yeah, the documentary, I believe, is called Tyrus, and it is out there in the world if listeners would like to track it down.
Tyrus is a really cool name.
It is.
I'm gonna log that one away. Not a fan. Nathan maybe doesn't want to name our children Tyrus. All of them.
You know, I do have a policy against naming all of our children the same thing, yes.
Tyrus 1, Tyrus 2, Tyrus 3.
So yeah, I think, you know, that work, the beauty of the backgrounds, the colors and the way that they combine to illustrate the different seasons, all of that is a big part of why the film works. There's also so much multiplane work in this film.
Gorgeous multiplane.
Yeah, the opening shot of the film is just this really long, intricately staged track through the forest where it just feels like you're moving through it because all the trees are moving at different depths and different levels of focus, and the animals are moving in and out of these spaces that are created by the tree. It's remarkable.
The amount of thought and production that would have to go into simply shooting that, let alone making all of the elements that you would need to shoot that. I'm really glad that they spent the time doing that, though. And it is forever.
It is forever. Disney will continue to make money off of it, release it, capitalize on it forever.
Forever.
So let's talk a little bit about the story of this film.
Is
or the
there?
Lack thereof.
There is no story. The story is there's a Bambi, and Bambi gets bigger.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that happen in the film, but there's not a plot the way we think of plot, where, you know, one thing leads to another and decisions kind of shape the course of how the film's going to unfold. It is a life in the forest.
Yeah, well, I mean, in a weird way, it's a biopic of a fictional deer.
So the film begins with the birth of Bambi, and we get to watch Bambi grow up and learn in a process that will be familiar to any parent or friends of a parent. I particularly enjoyed Bambi's process of learning language and his working through the process known as overgeneralization, where you learn a word and assume it applies to all sorts of things. So birds are winged creatures. Why wouldn't butterflies be birds? They have wings. Birds have wings. That must be what the word bird means. Bird.
That's not a bird. That's a butterfly. Butterfly. Their voices are so precious. Oh my gosh. I was melting into a puddle of just like gushing goodness.
The first half of the movie really is just a lot like that feeling of watching a child grow up and learn and try new things, and it's adorable.
It's super adorable. It follows that very fine line, though, of let's show a kid that's one of those scruffy boys with some dirt on his cheeks, but like at the end of the day has a little heart of gold. Is very much, I think, what Thumper is getting across, because he's so cute, but at the same time always getting in trouble slightly with his mom. But he didn't really do anything so that you as the audience are just overly endeared to him.
Thumper's only real crime is that he doesn't have a filter.
Aww. And, you know, at the end of the day, like, he does love Bambi. Like, he has only the best intentions, and he never says anything out of spite or meanness. He just calls it like he sees it.
And he does put in the work to help Bambi get better at things. He really helps Bambi work through ice skating, I guess.
And hopping over a log.
Mm-hmm.
Also, we learn very quickly that rabbits are better at everything than deer are.
Yeah, watching this movie, if I had to choose, I would definitely be a rabbit.
Yeah, but it's really fun to just hang out with them as kids. One of the things I learned in reading articles about the making of the film is that Walt Disney knew that capturing laughter is one of the hardest things to get out of an actor, and like even an adult actor, let alone kids, because it doesn't sound genuine unless it's happening for real. You really can't farce it. And so what they apparently ended up doing is they got all the kids that they had in Bambi, rounded them up, and had them watch a couple Mickey Mouse shorts, like the funniest Mickey Mouse shorts that they had to date. And they had secret microphones to capture their laughter. So the laughter that you hear in the film is actually like real, true, joyous laughter as they reacted to that hilarious Mickey Mouse.
It's really kind of meta that there is a review of other Disney animation within Disney animation.
But yeah, I mean, especially as a child actor, that'd be a grand old time.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a great thing to make money doing.
I have a fun fact for you.
Do you?
Did you know that in Bambi, they only have 950 words of dialogue in the film?
I did not know that, but that makes sense. It's not a talky movie.
It's really not. Apparently, Disney has done interviews saying that, like, he actually wished it had been less. It was like 200 words more than they intended to have in the film, because they really wanted the art and the music to carry the story.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it does.
I think it's pretty adorable that they managed to never say the word skunk in this film.
Mm-hmm.
They definitely danced around it a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Flower is an interesting character to me, because he's so sweet and obviously very, like, emotionally sensitive as a creature, which is not what you expect when you might meet a skunk. And especially my only other introduction to skunks on television, especially animation, is Pepe Le Pew. And Flower is the exact opposite of Pepe Le Pew. In fact, like, Flower has to get basically hunted by a lady skunk to kind of end up with one.
Yeah, I do think, overall, Bambi has a decently interesting mix of gender dynamics. Between Flower, who is very shy and sensitive and totally on board with being called pretty, and young Bambi himself, who is a fairly kind of sweet, sensitive, gentle child. Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of different types of ways of being in the world represented. It's a good mix of characters.
True facts. We spend a lot of time focused on adorable, cute baby Bambi, which I thoroughly enjoy. Then you just kind of hit upon life moments in a particular sequence of Bambi losing his mom and of Bambi...
A shot that traumatized a million children.
Oh, you can find so many people, from Stephen King to Paul McCartney, who all attribute that moment scarring them in their childhood. And I don't remember this film that well. So there's this fake out moment the first time they go to the meadow, and Bambi and the Prince of the Forest and his mom, who have all been kind of mutually separated, all come together and run through the rocks, and you hear the gunshot and you go, oh no, she's dead, and no, she's fine. I thought that that's when she was going to get shot, and oh my gosh, it was so tense. Thank goodness. And this film does get my stamp of approval, because it did make me cry when she does die for real. And
out of the 5 we've watched so far, which ones haven't made you cry?
Snow White did not make me cry. Pinocchio does not make me cry. I don't think I cried during Fantasia, but I cried during Dumbo, and I've cried during Bambi. Mm-hmm. So, like, those are solid films on the emotional level.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, so this has my feels stamp of approval. It has many feels.
It does. And, I mean, I even got a little misty-eyed in that moment. There is just something about the way that actual moment when it comes and how it's staged. There is that moment where you see them running, you hear the shot, you think, oh no, and she's okay. And then when she actually is shot, you're not really anywhere near her. It's off screen. The real tragedy is that Bambi doesn't know what happened.
There's several shots of Bambi continuing to run by himself back to their little den. Is just him alone. He gets back there and is, we made it, Mom, we made it. It's Mom, Mother. And then he wanders into the forest, into the snowfall, which is a perfect seasonal backdrop of just the barren sorrow. And he just keeps going.
And every single shot, the snow closes in tighter on him, gets thicker and thicker until you can barely see him. Yeah, it's got this just eclipsing, oppressive quality that just feels so sad and isolated and lonely, and it is just a beautiful sequence.
Yeah.
Which then hard cuts into spring.
Yeah, it was a hard transition to make. But before we leave winter, there is just something so heart-wrenching about Bambi not being able to compute, that his mother is gone until the the dark silhouette of his father, the Prince of the Forest, comes out to say, Bambi, your mother cannot be with you any longer. And Bambi lowers his head with a little single tear. Oh, man, is that relatable?
Yeah. I mean, I know people who do in fact hunt deer, but man, watching this once as a child, this feels like it was enough for me. I was like, oh no, why would you ever want to do that to these beautiful creatures? But almost any criticism I could make of hunting is largely hypocritical because I am, in fact, a meat eater.
We do eat the meats. This movie isn't supposed to be a well-rounded look at the balance of the circle of life. Like, that's Lion King's thing, is, Simba, we eat the antelope, and when we die, our bodies go into the dirt and make the grass that the antelope eat, and it is part of the great circle of life. That's not what Bambi's thing is. Bambi's thing is exclusively from the perspective of the animals, which is man comes into the forest and kills us, and that is scary. If you were an animal, that would be your perspective. Yeah. And I think we get very bogged down in, but you're now casting me in a bad light as a human, rather than being willing to look at things from another person's perspective. We only want to see it from our perspective, and there is this big wide space in the middle that the movie chooses not to inhabit, and instead tries to take us to the animal's point of view. It doesn't have to be right, but it is a perspective.
I mean, and it's very specifically Bambi's perspective. The film is very focused on him and, all the stages of his life. And, yeah, I mean, the human figures in this film really are just a mysterious other.
You never see a human
No.
in this film.
Mm-mm. You see the smoke of their camp, and that's about it.
We'll get to that.
So, hard cut to spring.
Twitterpation is upon us.
I'd forgotten how fun that sequence actually is. Twitterpated is a pretty perfect curmudgeonly monologue.
I love Twitterpation. Also, the owl is the most beautifully animated critter, I think, because I love the very cartoonish animation, and you don't get a lot of that in this film. This is the one character where, they really got to let go and do some really fun things with his animation, with his head turning 360 degrees and spinning around and walking on air. All of that was delightful.
My favorite, extreme cartoon animation in this film comes a little bit later. Bambi's grown up. He's got his fledgling antlers. Thumper appears, and Thumper's become just a real bro. He's definitely pledging a fraternity pretty soon. He's got the, facial hair and everything.
Okay, when you saw his whiskers, did they look like a mustache to you?
They do.
Like a parsley mustache?
Mm-hmm. And he just suddenly becomes Bugs Bunny. And the freeze frame moment where he first sees the Lady Rabbit is just such a surprisingly Warner Brothers feeling piece of delightful extreme comedic animation.
Even as a child, I really, really loved the Lady Rabbit, who's only on screen for, 20 seconds? But I always loved her very breathy voice, and the fact that she's this very plump bunny, but she is also a very beautiful bunny and knows that she has curves in all of the right places.
Wait, what are the right places for a bunny to have curves?
Where she has them, of course. She's just a very curvaceous, plump bunny, and that's very nice to see because we don't normally get to celebrate that body type, I think, in Hollywood.
I had not thought about that particular bunny in that way, but you're right.
She is the most beautiful of all bunnies.
I mostly kept paying attention to counting how many eyelashes the animals had. That was sort of my cue of oh yes, this is supposed to be a beautiful female animal. It has more and bigger eyelashes than the male animals.
I know. My challenge to everyone in animation going forward is please make all of your females eyelashless, or only give them as many eyelashes as you give your male characters, and figure out other ways to make them female.
In this relationship, I have the bigger eyelashes.
Mm-hmm. It's true. It's true. Your eyelashes are much more impressive than mine.
Oh, the listeners can't hear me batting my eyelashes.
But yes, and then of course we reintroduce the lovely, the beautiful, blue-eyed Feline, except for that one scene where she has brown eyes.
Right, yes. Except for that one scene.
Yeah, we didn't really talk about her earlier as a kid. Not that there's much to talk about.
Yeah.
She's a very simple character who is here to be the girl.
Yes.
She's also extremely useless in all scenarios.
I mean, it does reflect that sort of like brief moment in most people's childhood where, the girls start developing first and they get taller and more athletic and have better pose. Because when Feline first meets Bambi, she can run circles around him and Bambi's still kind of a klutz. But yeah, now that they're both adults, she's just a damsel in distress again.
Yeah.
Feline reunites with Bambi. They fall in love. Bambi gets to fight for her.
Against an angry deer named Ronnie.
Fight for her
Roni?
hoof in marriage. I don't know. What do you do?
Just one of them out of the four. Just one hoof.
Yes. Which is, I will say this. This film, surprisingly great action sequences. Really dynamic, really, really bold. The lighting in the fight with the other deer is quite striking. Except it does make it very hard to tell which deer is which.
I basically just had to wait for it to be over, and then they snap up to Bambi on top of the rock and the demon deer in the water below. And it's like, okay, cool, Bambi won. Awesome. Cool.
Yeah, the only real visual difference, between Bambi and Ronnie is that Ronnie is darker and has, like, bags under his eyes, which doesn't really translate when they become silhouettes against a bright red background.
Yeah. They never say his name in the film, so if we're pronouncing it wrong, I guess you can tell us.
But, it's not actually a name in the film.
We're probably never going to say his name again, though, but, feel free. Feel free to tell us. Mm-hmm. The thing that I found very striking about those moments is that for the most of the film, we're looking at very natural colors. Everything is just the forest as it would be, very green, very brown, blue sky, and then in these moments of extreme emotion in the fight between Bambi and Ronnie, and later on in the fire scene, like that is where all of a sudden we break out the most vibrant colors that clash with nature, so that we can really bring out those moments and the heightened emotion of them.
You could
really well
teach
done.
a whole color theory class just based on Bambi.
You could. Will we? Probably not.
After the big fight, we move pretty quickly from there into the big fire, which is the climactic sequence of the film.
Mm-hmm. The fire in this film is gorgeous, despite all of the destruction that it's.
It's a weird thing, being an artist and sort of wannabe connoisseur of these films, because you think, oh, this devastation, this horrifying nightmare is so beautifully rendered. I mean, look at the flickers of that flame, and just the color palette here is just beautifully terrible.
Well, but you also have to take into account the fact that it's being rendered in hopes that when you, the audience, sees it, you are so moved that you will act in your life to ensure that things like that don't happen. And actually, in history, when the Cooperative Forest Fire Prevention Program needed to start educating the public, because we're in World War II, we're sending all of our best men overseas, and we don't have enough men in America to really combat a terrible forest fire. So the best thing we can do is think about prevention and making sure that people going into our national forests are acting very responsibly. So one of the things that they do is put out these posters in 1944, and Disney had loaned them the characters of Bambi to use for a year, and so they made these beautiful, wonderful posters of, hey, mister, please make sure that you put out your fire before leaving your camp. You wouldn't want to, kill us, would you? With, Bambi's adorable eyes. And you can look these posters up on the internet, and the unfortunate thing is that Disney only loaned the characters for a year, and so they couldn't use them after that. And that's actually where Smokey the Bear comes from.
Smokey the Bear is the descendant of Bambi.
Yeah, the Cooperative Forest Fire Prevention Program needed... They saw how well using characters work to actually persuade people to think a little harder about forest fire prevention, and make sure that they really did put their campfires out or really did, snuff out their cigarettes. And they needed a character to fill the void after they couldn't use Bambi anymore. And so that is how Smokey the Bear came to be.
All right. Well, apparently Bambi had lots of children.
Including bears. It's true. Mm-hmm. It's on their website, actually, the CFFP.
Despite all the terror of the fire, the film wraps up on a pretty happy note, as we really go hard on the circle of not life feeling as a new Bambi is born. Well, two new Bambis, I suppose.
Twins!
And Bambi has at this point taken after his father and decided to remove himself and never talk to his children or his wife again.
Yes, the ending shot of the film after we've visited with Feline and her two babies, shocking. We pan up to the hillside where, when Bambi's mother had him, and the Prince of the Forest looked from afar. Now we see both the Prince of the Forest and Bambi aloofly looking at their children from afar, and my brain just realized, oh no, Bambi's going to take after his father too. No, son, we do not talk to our children. We merely look at them.
When they're in great danger, we may deign to impart wisdom.
Mm-hmm. Oh, dear.
Oh, dear.
Oh,
indeed.
dear.
Brief side thought. It is interesting to consider in a lot of these... the way these stories are traditionally structured, right? The father has to pass away so that the son may grow up to be the next iteration and become independent. That's how the Lion King works. It was surprising to me to get to the end of Bambi. I didn't really remember that. No, they're both now, king and prince of the forest, and the parent doesn't necessarily have to pass away for the child to come into their own. Bambi's mother obviously does pass away, but that feels less of a coming-of-age moment and more of a kind of commentary on the dangers of life in the forest.
The danger of being an animal.
Yeah.
Don't do it, guys.
I mean, I think it's interesting to think about the way that Disney is making some concessions to the actual, mating patterns and patterns of life for these animals that it's depicting. More so than it would, say, in The Lion King, where we just don't talk about lion mating patterns.
Kids can go to the zoo. They can learn about actual lions.
These lions are going to fall in love exclusively and monogamously.
Yes. Let's just recap how much Bambi is like The Lion King.
Let's recap how The Lion King, which came out 50 years later, is like Bambi.
Fine. The Lion King opens with a scene about how the new prince has been born.
Mm-hmm. Although, in The Lion King, it is a grand royal procession. In the Bambi, it's oh, neat.
Yes, the forest animals are just a lot more quiet about it because it's a baby. And the entire savannah is just let's have a party!
I appreciate
Everyone
the forest
make
approach.
Your noises! And, we have some scenes of the kids growing up, and then they lose their primary caregiver. In The Lion King, it's Mufasa, which I think is the scene that scarred all of us as children, truly.
Mm-hmm. They reunite with their childhood flame.
Exactly. And then we have a song as they fall in love.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. And then the fire at the end feels very much like when Simba returns to the Pride Lands. and everything is barren and burned away. And the same thing sort of happens at the end of Bambi, minus any villainous Scar characters, but everything has been scorched and has to grow back again once the rightful king prince has taken his rightful place.
Yeah, I mean, they are both in many ways circle of life films, although Bambi doesn't use that phrase.
And then Bambi looks down from Pride Rock over his kingdom. Everything the light touches.
Well, it's a forest, so there's actually a lot the light doesn't touch. So. And yeah, when they talk about the circle of life in The Lion King, it is much more of that very big picture. Well, eventually we will die and we will become the earth and we will be the food for the plants which will feed the other animals and so on and so forth. Whereas the circle in Bambi is much tighter. It's much more of a, you will be born, you will be a child, you will grow, you will fall in love, and then you will have children and the cycle will begin again.
Well, Nathan, what is the moral of Bambi?
If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Is that a good lesson?
Yes.
With an asterisk?
I mean, I think in general, if no one has asked you to critique something, maybe don't jump in with your opinions. Well, I mean, also, like, don't attack anyone with mean words. Just don't do that. Our world would be a much better place if we all said nice things to each other or had actual constructive criticism. But for the most part, like, if no one has asked for your criticism, like, maybe consider not giving it. Oh, hey! You know what we haven't played?
What haven't we played?
We haven't played Guess Who.
Oh.
So we have introduced this wonderful character, the Great Prince of the Forest, who you can tell is different from the other deer by his magnificent deer beard.
Yes, and the epic antlers.
But mostly the deer beard. He's played by a man named Fred Shields.
You know, I was not crazy about his voice. I feel like he could have been deeper and more regal. Been working on this for 7 years. What, they couldn't find someone guy to read like 3 lines?
I thought he was a wonderful great prince of the forest. Anyway, guess who else he has played in the history of Disney? He is about to become somewhat prevalent in our lives. As a clue, because he will be hard to guess.
Does he play the king in Sleeping Beauty?
No.
Okay.
He is the narrator in Saludos Amigos and The Three Caballeros. So most of the shorts that we are about to watch in those films, he will be the narrator of, as well as a couple of other shorts, including How to Play Baseball and How to Golf.
Wait, the how-to goofy shorts?
Yeah.
Oh, I love that narrator.
Yeah. That's
He's
him.
great at that.
Well, at least in those two. And there's a lot of how-to goofy shorts, so I don't know that I don't believe he's the narrator in all of them, but the baseball and golf shorts, yes.
I do like that baseball short.
There is another actress named Marion Darlington, which is just the most perfect, wonderful name.
You're right, yeah.
I kind of don't want to tell you who she plays in Bambi because I feel like that'll give it away in all of the other movies. She plays the same character in Snow White, Pinocchio, and Cinderella, as well as Bambi.
So she's either the mother or the girl. Well, the mother isn't even in Snow White, is she?
Mm-hmm. This is extremely hard.
I give up.
Marion Darlington is the birds in Bambi,
Ha!
Snow White, Pinocchio, and Cinderella. And she is also the whistling sound effect in So Dear to My Heart.
All right.
So she's kind of the Dee Bradley Baker of her time. But I just thought that was a really cool person to call out.
I mean, if your name is Marianne Darlington.
Well, it's Marion with an O. Marion.
Marianne Darlington.
I now look forward to listening for her in Cinderella. I think is the only one we have left. But yeah, pretty impressive.
Mm-hmm. Well, that, I suppose, will bring our discussion of 1942's Bambi to a close. There's not really a story here, so it's not like anyone would make a sequel, right?
Oh, They did that. They did do that. Okay. Listen to this. Listen to this. Bambi 2, and I quote from the internet, set in the middle of Bambi, Bambi 2 shows the great prince of the forest struggling to raise the motherless Bambi, and Bambi's doubts about his father's love. And you know what? I kind of want to see that film.
That is not what I expected Bambi 2 to be about.
Right?
I expected it to be a rehash with two Bambis.
Two Bambi? Oh, you
Two Bambis, Too Furious. I expected it to be about the Bambi twins, but no, that is an interesting area to explore.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Lion King 2 was about, of course, Simba's pride. This is not about Bambi's pride. This is about literally Bambi struggling with the loss of his mother, with his, father who doesn't know how to be a father figure.
That's deep for a direct-to-video sequel.
I know. I really want to watch this now. So we will at least have to watch this, whether or not we actually do an episode on it. But I'm kind of looking forward to that.
Oh, I hadn't even thought about Disney Plus being home to all of the direct-to-video sequels.
Hey, there are some pretty good Disney sequels. I stand by The Little Mermaid 2 and The Lion King 2.
I stand by The Lion King 1.5.
Really? You've seen The Lion King 1.5?
I have.
And you liked it?
I thought it was silly nonsense.
Which is a rave review from Nathan.
Mm-hmm. I enjoy the idea that, The Lion King is Hamlet, and Lion King 2 is Romeo and Juliet, and Lion King 1.5 is Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead.
I never thought about it that way.
Well, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed our podcast, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast player. You can write us at retroscoping@gmail.com or find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Retroscoping. Join us next time for Saludos Amigos.
Saludos Amigos!
And the beginning of the compilation era. In the meantime, go out and live happily ever after.
Bird, 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 bird.
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 That's not a bird, that's a butterfly.
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 Oh dear.
Oh
indeed.
dear.